Hi, looking forward to have you here this episode. David may be one of the most influential and OG of the InsurTech space. Been around InsurTech forever. After doing this episode with him, I realized how far back he goes. 2016, 2015 InsurTech, right? That is very, very far back. He has been in the scene with Stacy Brown, both innovating over here at InsurTech New York, InsurTech Hartford, but InsurTech New York doing a lot of cool things. And after this interview, I realized they have so much going on. And they're trying to build five, six companies, which building one is hard, right? So I'm looking forward for you to hear his journey and everything that he's building over at InsurTech New York. Hi, welcome to this episode of Industry Voice. And today, I am bringing you a special guest. He is one of the OG in InsurTech community. And welcome to the show, David Gritz.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
David, I'm excited about this episode. The day that I knew I was going to do my podcast, I was like, okay, I got to come up with theme. I got to come up with show name. And then when I came up with the name of the show, I was like, okay, I am going to interview people who have a community, who have a story, who are their own storyteller of their community. I'm going to tell their stories. And then I was like, who are the OG? And you and Stacy, you guys were top on my list. I was like, let's get them on the pod. And I appreciate you for coming on. And I am excited to have our audience hear your story. So if you can, just give us a little bit about, David, what did David do before insurance and how did you stumble onto insurance? And then, what turned you onto InsurTech? I had Arlen on earlier and Arlen was like, I met Stacy in Vegas and we hit it off, fell in love, and we came back from Vegas and launched InsurTech Hartford. So, what is David's story?
All right, happy to start from the beginning. So, I was a industrial engineer for my undergrad, and then, after school, I went into the tech space. I worked at a tech consulting company that did pretty much borderline the most boring thing that you can do, which is support core systems. So they ran core systems for companies like MetLife, DuPont, Royal Caribbean. And when I say core systems, I mean the actual mainframe, COBOL, AS400, the stuff that keeps our world running. We ran that stuff. So I was fortunate enough to get hired by the CEO to kind of act as a chief of staff for him for special projects. And then I ran the partnerships for the company. So, we work with a lot of innovation people, and I kind of started my career grinding it out as the person that would find partnerships for, a real old school company. We weren't quite insurance, but we were tech. So I learned, across a lot of different industries. And then, like a lot of entrepreneurs, that entrepreneurial bug is something that you just can't let escape. So you have to just act on it. And, I started a house flipping business in Philadelphia. I started an ed tech company where we actually had physical incubators at three different universities in New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, and basically built software to connect the entrepreneurs within a university to alumni and other resources in their community. But there was a point when I got into InsurTech. So that was 2015. While I was running that business, a friend of mine reached out to me and he was running an insurer that was focused on, workers' comp and commercial auto. And they were just not having that many good years. They had a reinsurer drop them and they were looking to really turn around. So he reached out to me to help him turn around. And he said, I think we can build some technology to help turn our business around. And I said, I don't know anything about insurance, but I know a lot about building software. So we teamed up and we spun a software company out of the insurance company called Zero for zero lost days of work. And the whole idea was we were going to go to large industrial companies, go to their customers and help them, ultimately reduce workers' comp claims by getting the ideas that were in the risk manager's head down to the line workers. So the people that, are taking the stuff out of the septic tanks, that are driving the buses, that are running on the manufacturing line. There's the ones that create the risk, but most of the time, they're not the ones that are part of the risk management conversation. So we made them, through our application, part of the risk management conversation, drove down losses through behavioral safety. And that was kind of the start of my hook on InsurTech. So we grew that business. We sold it to Everest. I spent some time in Silicon Valley working with the Silicon Valley Insurance Accelerator to help them with their events. They're actually kind of famous for running the first InsurTech event in 2015 before ITC. And actually, Stacy and I, we were talking about Stacy earlier, we met at one of the SVIA events, and I invited him because I was like, got to have Hartford represent in Silicon Valley. And I think it was the Enterprise Risk Management Conference where we really got to, know each other. And, eventually that led to us running stuff like, InsurTech Slopes and InsurTech Rapids. But how we started InsurTech New York is, after I'd sold the Zero company that was focused on workplace safety and was working on the Silicon Valley community, I realized that there wasn't a lot going on in New York, right? There was a lot of startups, but there wasn't like a grassroots community to support them. There wasn't things to connect investors or incumbents to the startups. So I met my business partner Tony, and we started working together. We were originally advising startups, and then we realized that there was a much deeper need for community, and InsurTech New York was born.
So let's take it back. You give us the macro. I'm going to compartmentalize it and go to the micro. A lot to unpack there. I never knew the story. You were flipping houses, and we hung out together a couple of times. Did you enjoy it?
I did. So when I was 12 years old, I read the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book, and that was a huge inspiration for me. And as those people have read the book know, it essentially advocates real estate as one of the strategies to build long-term wealth. So, I was very much a saver from a kid. So every time I got, a birthday present or, a graduation gift or whatever it was, I was a hustler as a kid, washing cars in the neighborhood or, shoveling snow. All that went into my save to buy a property fund. First year salary as much as I could possibly save. And then, when I had enough money for a down payment, I bought a 3-unit.
How old were you when you bought your 3-unit?
I was, let's see, so that would be 2012. So yeah, I was either 21 or 22. I forget what month it was that year.
So at 21 years old, when most kids are college parties, popping bottles at the club, or driving M3s for their first paycheck, you were buying 3 units.
Yeah, I mean, it was one 3-unit that year, but I did start my, real estate adventures, so to speak.
Yeah, I like it. That's the spirit of entrepreneur. Let's go into Silicon Valley insurance innovation. And I think you said that fast, but a lot of our listener doesn't understand what you said. So I'm going to just give a little backdrop. In the last 8 years, I think the number is somewhere around 72 to $80 billion came into InsurTech, right? From venture capital backed, institution backed. And I read a number somewhere, it was around 80% of all that fund came from California. And most of that fund that came from California came from one little square block, which is the Silicon Valley, Bay Area, or Menlo Park, whatever you call it. And what did you learn out there that gave you a lot of inspiration to take what you saw and back to New York to kick off InsurTech New York? Can you go back to those days and just give us, for the audience who are not there with you, right? While you're talking about this, I'm already on their LinkedIn looking them up, the people that was there. What did you thought that was different? They're like, okay, this is cool. Thank you for all your support to our channel. Here is a quick word from our sponsor. Please click on the link below in the comment section to sign up for a demo with Track AI.
What if your insurance sales conversations could work harder for you? Meet Track, your AI-powered conversation intelligence partner. Track automatically captures and analyzes every customer interaction, providing instant call summaries, risk analysis, and AI-driven coaching insights. Say goodbye to manual note-taking and hello to more selling time. Track handles the admin work while you handle the revenue. Fully integrated with your favorite platforms. Plus, get custom AI analysis tailored to your unique business needs. Transform your sales team's performance with Track. Visit track.ai today.
Click the link in the description below to schedule a demo with Track today.
It's not necessarily specific to SVIA, but I think it's more the experience like pre-pandemic, what it was like to be in Silicon Valley. And, I'll try and do my best to paint the picture. So, not everyone has necessarily been to the Bay Area. So the Bay Area is not actually, one place. Obviously there's the San Francisco Bay, but it's really actually three different hubs, right? So you have the city, which is, downtown San Francisco, and this was like pre-Salesforce Tower. But, you definitely have your iconic buildings. You have the financial district. And around that time was when the mission was gentrifying. There's a lot of startups down there. And I would say, if you were in your younger 20s and you were a software engineer, San Francisco was kind of the place to be. That being said, that was one of the three parts of, San Francisco Bay Area. The second part, kind of in the area, they call it, the Peninsula or South Bay, but it's essentially, Palo Alto and the surrounding area. So Palo Alto is really, its hub is where Stanford is. So there's Stanford, there's Palo Alto, there's Atherton, like you said, Menlo Park, and basically every city in the South Bay has kind of like a famous company that marks that city. So, Menlo Park is Facebook, Mountain View is Google, Cupertino is Apple, right? And, those become the anchors. And then what happens is like really talented engineers and business people, they come in, they work at these companies, they come up with the ideas, and they start their own companies. And I think what amazed me is just the concentration of like Ivy League school people that are just really smart, that like move to, Silicon Valley to try and do a startup, make a name for themselves, join one of these tech companies. And what was really unique then is like, this was some of the early days of like meetup.com. And you could basically go on a random Tuesday or Thursday night, and there'll be some kind of like founder mixer tech event, and it'll be like 100 people at a random restaurant, and there'll be like 20 VCs, there'll be, startups, there'll be wannabe startup people, there'll be tech people, and they're all about that energy to like create new technologies and innovation and transform industries. And for me, even though I was living on the East Coast at the time, I was flying back and forth for a lot of the events and activities, probably there, once a month or so. And it was just awesome to be around that. And like, a few of my friends literally had houses where it was like founder hacker houses where, it might be a 5 or 6 bedroom place in, Atherton or Palo Alto. There'd be like 10 people living there, and people living on bunk beds, and they're all trying to make it. Like they were, paying themselves nothing to try and get their startup off the ground. And, InsurTech is a little bit different than the pure tech that I'm talking about. But I think what is great about that Silicon Valley culture is the share of information, right? So if one person has an idea, people want to pay it forward. They want to mentor each other. The VCs share information, and everyone works together to support the ecosystem. And if you compare that with a lot of other places, that doesn't really exist in the same way, whether, it's London or Sydney or Munich or Berlin. You have pods, like, you might have co-working spaces or different places, but you don't have like an entire city ecosystem that has a vibe. And I know I mentioned only two of the three. The third, which often gets ignored, is kind of the Oakland, Berkeley area or East Bay, which, now is anchored by Fremont. Tesla has their factory. But Berkeley is a great hub. There's Berkeley Skydeck, and a lot of startups come out of Berkeley. And then of course, like Oakland is well known for its biotech scene, its clean energy scene. But back then it was like if you were too poor for San Francisco, maybe you'd live in Oakland and hope you could like hustle your way. It's kind of like if you live in like Jersey City or Newark and you want to like move eventually to Manhattan. It's kind of that same vibe. But what's interesting is, as we've gone through, the pandemic, I think a lot of that, has been lost. Some of it's been coming back. But to me, I feel like it's been lost. And, fortunately to us, it's kind of been replaced by New York. New York has events all the time. All the conferences want to happen in New York. It's now the fintech hub. And, because of some of the work we've been doing, we're contributors. There's also others. New York is really the InsurTech hub. Like if you're running an InsurTech, you move to New York, you set up an office, whether it's, you're coming from London, you're coming from Bangalore, you're even coming from, let's say Kansas City. And what's great is like almost every broker that's a large broker has an office in New York. Almost all the specialty insurers have an office in New York. The reinsurance brokers are there. The reinsurers are there. So, if you're trying to do business, you can kind of like go to one place, like, a small island and get business done. So it's been fun, witnessing that transition. But I think a lot of it was because we started InsurTech New York in 2019 and made people realize how great of a city New York was. And it's funny, like, yesterday we had one of the entrepreneurs that was in our accelerator telling me, hey, I want to like create, an organization or, a group in San Francisco to start running events there or in California, because I feel like we don't have that community anymore. And it's a shame because like while SVIA was running and, when Plug and Play was getting started in the Bay Area, that was really there. And I think, unfortunately, like we pulled the magnet over to New York and we lost a little bit there. I mean, obviously there are a fair number of strong insurtechs in Silicon Valley, but they don't have the same dynamic of all the fintech VCs and all the customers, right? The insurers and the brokers.
That was good content. That was awesome. I want to ask next, how did you meet your partner?
Good question. So, I mentioned, I had sold Zero, and then, I was working with SVIA, helping them with some of their events. I was advising a number of startups, in the InsurTech space as they were building their products. And, my original thinking was, I'd built a few different products. I had, tech knowledge. Why don't I start, a boutique product consulting firm where I can then help startups to, get from initial idea stage to product live and then start to scale and be involved in that as kind of, a fractional product team that we could help launch companies. And, I started on that path, but, I would say like any business, whether it's a consulting business or a new software product, there's an evolution process and you need to learn things, right? And like, I didn't necessarily have that like McKinsey or BCG background where I knew how to sell big accounts and how to manage that whole process. So I was learning along the way, and I went to this conference. There was a guy named David A. Fields that I had known from when I was back at the tech company at Computer Aid. And, he was kind of an expert at helping boutique consulting firms get started. So I joined his conference to learn, and Tony just happened to be at that conference. And, I didn't even meet Tony at the conference, but I kind of followed up with all the other independent consultants that were at the conference to see if we had opportunities to collaborate. And Tony was the only other one there that had product expertise. Tony had worked at Alibaba, at BCG, at Gartner, at GE, and really had done product strategy. So we kind of hit it off and we said, well, why don't we combine forces? Like you'll do the product strategy, I'll do the product development, and we can really have a boutique firm. And since I had been working with SVIA, we were trying to figure out what focus area was. And we thought, well, why not InsurTech? I know a lot of InsurTechs. I build an InsurTech. Like we would be pretty credible as like a boutique product consulting firm for InsurTech. And that business was called Startup Al. But not a lot of people know, but InsurTech New York is actually a DBA of Startup Al. So we started helping startups, but then realized there was a bigger need for community. And, as we got along, we're like, let's just build this community. It's probably a better business model than just doing a consulting firm. There's less competition and it's unique. And I know the playbook from, SVIA, from Plug and Play, from InsurTech Munich Hub, from the incubator that I ran myself. So we can just take what everyone else is doing around the globe on InsurTech and make our New York version of it, mix and match different things, and we'll build this community. And that was kind of the start of it.
When you guys building the community, what was your first event?
So our first event was August of 2019. I think it was like an investing InsurTech topic or something very similar to that. It was very simple. We just had one panel. We had like the head of corporate development at Swiss Re. We had the former head of innovation at RGA, who was now working on his own startup at the time, meet Jerry. We had like a principal from Tribeca Venture Partners. And then there was one other investor. I think we had Adam, who was the head of CVC at Guardian at the time. So it was four of them. And, we kind of just did some ad hoc marketing and like 75 people showed up. I thought we would get like 20 people. So it was at that point, like I knew we had something there. We had this energy in a bottle and we had to just keep pushing it.
Where was the event at?
We held it at a law firm office called McCarter in English. So we were really lucky in the co-working space we were at. I think Tony had met a VC called MedStarter, this guy, Alex Fair. And we were really struggling to get space. To convince someone for a new organization to give you free space was really hard. And Alex said, hey, you should meet this guy named Joe Daniels. So Joe Daniels is an attorney. He focuses in like venture capital space, like helping startups do the legal work for their fundraisers and, doing, M&A work. And he's like, hey, you can use my office. Like, just run it at our McCarter in English space, which was like a super nice space in Manhattan. And so Joe was part of our kind of origin story a little bit, giving us the first space for the first event.
COVID hit not long after you guys launched the event scene. How'd you guys pivot?
So actually, it's funny, like, we had these kind of crazy ideas along the way. Like one of the ideas was run our accelerator at like 7 different insurance company offices. So then the startups would cycle around and can meet a lot of people there. And that was part of like our early 2020 vision, right? But the most immediate thing was, we had our first conference plan for March. I think it was March 19th of 2020. And, we had the venue set, we had all the speakers set, including some, European speakers. And I think it was the 12th when Trump had basically, banned European travel. And like, a bunch of the people that were speakers from Europe are like, I can't come. I physically can't come. So we were sitting in a coffee shop across from the venue. It was me, Tony, and one of our advisors at the time, Brett. And we basically just said, what the heck are we going to do? Should we just like give up and stop doing the conference, or should we do something else? And Tony, actually, to his credit, since January was like, we need a backup plan. We need to have an option to go virtual. He's like, because Tony's family, still his parents live in Korea, and they had like some semblance to know what was happening in China. And, basically, he was very concerned that something might happen. And, in January, he's like, can we build out this plan? In February, he's like, can we build out this plan? In early March, he's like, can we build out this plan? I think he was actually building it out behind the scenes. So, March 12th, I'm like, let's go, let's go. So we literally called every single speaker and we're like, can you do virtual? And then we reached out to every attendee and we're like, look, we're going to make the best virtual event ever. This is going to be awesome. Let's just do it. So we literally became the first virtual conference ever. And we had 300 people registered, and, we let people bring some of their friends. So we end up having like 450 people registered, first virtual InsurTech conference. And then after that, all these other conferences like chickened out, canceled, took their insurance payout for business interruption, whatever they did, except for a few brave ones, which called us up and said, you did virtual, can you teach us what to do? So we kind of became like virtual conference, like, advisors, helpers to some of the other groups, which was good because it kind of like strengthened our relationship with, some of the other groups. Like I think GIA was one of them, one of the other accelerators, and we got to become, better friends because we could help them out.
Our audience understand that all the things that you are working on and the InsurTech community move around you guys. I mean, the door that you open for founders and VCs, and we only got so much time, but I want to get a couple of subjects so this way that you know how to tackle them. I want you to talk about InsurTech Spring Conference 2023, 2024, 2025. I missed out on this year, but I was there last year and it was awesome. It was one of my favorite conference. And you got one coming up next year in April. And also, if you can go back and just talk about how did you guys start the fund? You guys have a fund now to invest in founders as well. And then you guys do these events like Slopes, like Whitewater. So if you can just touch upon that.
Sure. So maybe high level, we do four things. So we run conferences and events. We have a corporate membership program where we help insurance carriers and brokers connect with startups. Our, growth stage accelerator fits under that. We have the MGA lab where we help startups launch completely new insurance products. So from idea to first policy sold. And then we have our fund. And as part of our MGA lab, we're actually launching a reinsurance entity to help reinsure some of these MGAs. So that's the four. But to get to your question, so, spring conference 2023, 2024, 2025. So usually around each of the conferences, we have, a different theme. So like some of the themes we've had in the past is like, digital first versus customer first, right? And then, the theme we have for, April of next year is InsurTech is the new R&D. And I think, I believe that that's a very significant transition because if you look back to like the first ITC 2016, they had Lemonade up there and everything was all about disrupting the insurance industry. And I think if you ask any InsurTech founder now, do you think you're disrupting the industry? Most of them are going to say, no, like I'm evolving the industry. And we firmly believe like InsurTechs are not going to make Chubb go out of business or, steal all the business away from Nationwide. They're actually just going to enhance the universe of coverage that's out and available for different people, right? The insurance is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. What it needs is to be more efficient and serve more people. It doesn't necessarily need to be disrupted. I mean, it's profitable, right? Like you look at Berkshire Hathaway, one of the most high growth long-term companies is out there, right? So they hit the $1 trillion club. They're doing great. Like no one's gonna say like, Geico is a company that shouldn't exist and like, Lemonade should take their place or something. So really at the end of the day, we think the best way to position is like InsurTech is R&D, right? Like startups are more nimble, they're faster, they're able to attract talent from other industries. And if they do the research, the best groups to actually capitalize it and take it to the broader, largest market are the corporate venture units at the insurance companies and the insurance companies themselves. So take, like one of our startups in the MGA lab, right? For sure. They launched a pet insurance product. And what's amazing about it is with pet insurance, usually what you have to do is like you pay for the vet visit and then you get paid back by the insurance company, right? The challenge with that is like, what if you don't have the $700 to pay for your pet's surgery? You gotta like shake down a bunch of friends to get the money and then get paid back. So for sure, simple innovation is like, they have a debit card, they put the money on the card, they know how much it is, and then they just pay for it. So then you don't have this whole complicated reimbursement product. And it's Gen Z friendly. So their launch as an MGA, they partnered with a Long Island based insurer that essentially became their capacity provider, gave them paper and reinsurance. But they're taking this core technology and they're offering it to other insurers that have much bigger market share, because they know, right now I think it's like 4 or 5% of pet owners have pet insurance, but 20%, 30% isn't unreasonable if the product was just a little bit better. So they are becoming the R&D for the rest of the industry, because these really smart engineers that went to Princeton and worked at companies like Facebook are a little bit nimbler than the people that spent 20 years at Nationwide in their pet division, right? That don't necessarily understand the piping of debit cards, because it wasn't what they learned in the first year of Nationwide training. So I think we're excited to kind of play out this theme this coming year in April. And if it works, like a lot of our conferences going forward could really play off of that theme.
That's amazing. You guys are always innovating over there. We I want to get you back on the fund. Who was the first family office or private equity or angel investor that says, you know what, we believe in you guys. You guys can get these founders from C stage to the next stage, or pre-C stage to the C stage. And you know what, here's a check, go build a fund and go invest in these founders.
Yeah, good question. So, we started the fund in basically 2022. We were fundraising in 2021 for Fund One. And, I don't remember exactly who was the first check. So most of the investors in our Fund One are, individuals. So executives at insurance companies, individual angel investors. We have founders who sold their companies, whole different kind of set of people. But I'll give you one, because I know he was pretty early on in the process, who probably you'll have on your show at some point, is Brian Folchuk. So, Brian and I had met, I think it was either through one of the Reuters conferences where we were both moderating, or I'm not even sure how we originally met. It might even have been at SVIA. Good question to ask Brian. Maybe he'll remember better than me. But he had always been a supporter of our community, a mentor to startups. So, I wasn't really exactly sure, Brian's kind of financial position or anything like that. But, we kind of presented the fund to him and our vision and what we were doing, and he was an instant supporter. So he invested in the fund, and he brought a bunch of his friends that he had worked with at Hiscox to also invest in our fund. So I would say he's one of our top early advocates, at least in Fund One.
That's awesome to have people in the corner. And who was the first portfolio founder that you guys took on?
Yeah, so the first portfolio company we invested in is a Canadian company called Single Key. So what they do is essentially tenant screening. So a world that I know a lot about. They do the credit check. So they have partnership with TransUnion. They have a nearly exclusive relationship with Equifax in Canada. And then they do, eviction check and background check for landlords. And they focus kind of on that mom and pop landlord space. And then they also do rental guarantee. So basically for 5% of the rent, you can guarantee the rent for the full period of the lease. So if the tenant defaults, they'll cover until you get the eviction started.
Wow. So I was just about to say, is that not an insurance product? But when you say tenant guarantee, it would go back to insurance product, basically. Is your fund 100% insurance and insurance industry?
So we call it insurance and insurance adjacencies, right? So if you think about it, tenant screening would be considered risk management for landlords, but rental guarantee is essentially, a warranty, or they run it as a CLIP, so a contract for liability indemnity protection. But essentially, it's a contractual obligation that they're covering through insurance.
This is going to be an interesting question because I don't know how you can take it. You have met so many people in your life that are so high achievers and incredible people. Is there anybody that stand out in your mind the last 5 years that has really made an impact on your life, on your career as a mentor?
Yeah, so I'll give you one. There's been a lot of different mentors I've had over my life, and I think a lot of the mentors I had were kind of early on in my career because I was always hungry early on. I mean, one of the coolest things I ever did in college was I convinced one of my professors to create a new program. We called it Alumni Leadership Insights. So I basically got carte blanche from him to go to the alumni office, ask them for every CEO that had graduated from my university, and to just interview them under this banner of Alumni Leadership Insights. So I interviewed a few billionaires. I interviewed people who started law firms, construction companies, finance companies, all kinds of different companies. So I learned a ton, and this was in my late teens, early 20s, that those became like some foundational lessons. So one of those people who, believe it or not, I didn't even think about this until recently, is actually an InsurTech founder. But the guy's name is Paul Zane Pilzer, and probably not that many people have heard about him, but just some claims to fame. I think he's taken 3 companies public, started 21 companies. One of his exits was like 400 million, his InsurTech one, called Zane Benefits. And, he's written 7 books. I think one of them is called like God Wants You to Be Rich or something like that. He's almost like a, Guy Kawasaki or a Tony Robbins type of guy, just like not super discovered. He lives in Park City. He's also a snowboarder, like me. So, very amazing guy. I mean, if you want to take one thing out of this podcast, I would say go read one of Paul Pilzer's books. He's also he's written about like the healthcare space as well. So he has interesting books on healthcare, tons of different lessons from him. But I'll just give you one for the podcast, and we can always come back and talk about more. But basically, he was the youngest person to get into University of Pennsylvania's business school, now called Wharton. And he tells the story, and basically, usually at Wharton, you have to have some experience. You can't just apply right after undergrad. It might be a little bit different now, but this is, when he was going to school. And, at the time, he has other story that I have to tell another time about, his grades and things like that. But, he didn't necessarily have perfect grades or perfect GMAT or whatever. So he applied, right? And he got rejected, right? And most normal people are like, okay, whatever, I'll go to Duke or I'll go to another MBA program. And he's like, no, I'm going to Penn. I am going to go to Wharton. So what he did is he went to the president of the university that we both shared together, Lehigh University. And the president at the time, I think, was also part of the Apollo space program. So he was a little bit famous. And he said, look, I really want to get into the school. Can you ask them to reconsider me? So he actually convinced the university president that was part of the Apollo space mission to call the, admissions officer at Penn, and Lehigh and Penn are not far apart. They're kind of semi-sister schools in a sense, where they're strong engineering schools and, only, 70 miles apart. So the president called, and essentially, the admissions officer called Paul back and said, we'll reconsider you. I think they gave him something like, you got to get your GMAT score up or something like that. And eventually he actually got accepted. And what Paul taught me is basically, if you're ever rejected from something in your life, it doesn't mean you can't do it or you're not able to do it, if you think about it, or the perspective that he explained is like you're climbing up a ladder, right? And most people climb up one rung at a time. But when you get rejected, it just means you're trying to climb up 2 or 3 rungs or 4 rungs at a time, and you're kind of missing a gap or a step in the middle. So what you have to do is just like figure out that gap in the middle and then just keep pushing, because you're still on the right track. Like getting a no is still an answer. It's better than no answer, but you're just trying to go like 2 rungs at a time. So, that was a lesson from Paul Pilzer. There's a lot of good lessons that I had from him. And, I interviewed him like, I don't know, 2010, 2011, so 14 years ago. And I still remember some of these. I think I probably even have the recording from it. I hope I have it somewhere. Maybe it's in my iTunes or something. But a lot of his good lessons are in his books too. So you can kind of gather some of those. And he was also a real estate guy. He made his first million from real estate, buying properties in Long Island. Fine, I'll give you one more Paul Pilzer story if you want, Jeff. So another Paul Pilzer story, also about rejection. So he started at an investment bank right after school. I forget if it was Citi or Chase or one of those. And he was like the lowly analyst working out of a closet or whatever. And he was a kind of nerdy guy. So what everyone did, or what was in vogue for the investment bankers in Wall Street, is over the summer, you would rent a house in the Hamptons, and that's where you go and hang out and go to parties and have fun. So what he would do, and typically how you get into a house is like, the people that rented the house, they have parties, and then they have people come by and they, show how cool they are. And if they're cool enough, they're like, yeah, we'll let you rent a room in our house together. So Paul probably went to like, half a dozen or a dozen of these parties. And, I guess he was just like too nerdy for the rest of the group. So they all were like, no, we're not interested. Can't join our house. No, thanks. Right. So what did he do? He turned around and he's like, well, why don't I just rent a house? So he rented a house, and then, all the nerdy people, anyone who wanted to be part of the house in Wall Street, he just let them into his house. And that led to him buying houses, right? Because then he can get the money down from the people that want to rent the house, buy it, and rent it back out to them. And he used that strategy to build up, a ton of real estate in Long Island, to the point where he was making more money from rental income than his boss at the investment bank.
While you're going through all the Paul Pilzer stories, on Bookstore, he has written 20 books.
7 are bestsellers.
And the Wellness Revolution is interesting because he wrote a Chinese version in Chinese.
Yes. So, like me, his wife is also Chinese, and he's actually done a lot of speaking in China. So that's probably why his books are in Chinese. So we have a lot, Paul and I have a lot of overlapping things, which what made him very inspirational to me, as you can imagine.
David, we need to get Paul on the pod. Actually, I have a lot to ask, David. Get Paul on the pod, and all your portfolio companies, if they want to come on the pod, your investors, man, we're going to have like David's Community Network just come on this pod. But
we can do it.
David, with next year coming up, the end of the year, are you going to be at ITC?
I will. I'm just going to be there for the first day on the 15th, but I will be available to hang out with people.
Awesome. So if you look for a year from now, I get David back on the pod. We're chopping it up. What are some of the comfortable goals you have for the next year and uncomfortable goals you have for the next year?
Yeah, good question. So comfortable goals is, we're going to have an amazing event in April. We'll have 1,000 people. We're going to have a lot of fun at InsurTech Spring, and we're going to meet some cool people there. Other comfortable goals, every year our business is like a cycle, right? So we have the spring conference, we run the accelerator, we do the MGA lab. So the thing of the business that I like, the most right now is our MGA lab, because we really get to help companies, go from initial idea to launch. So I want to say, almost all it's hard to say all, right? Because some of them might decide to stay in the configuration they are, whether it's software or broker. Of our MGA lab companies in the current cohort will get capacity and they will launch their products and they're going to be awesome and they're going to grow their premium. So some uncomfortable goals, we're still out, fundraising for our second fund, and, it's difficult, and I know we'll do it, but that's a slightly uncomfortable goal. So, we'll hit or exceed our target for, the fund. We are already investing out of fund two, but, we're still kind of fundraising, investing at the same time, which I know, a lot of startups have to run their business and fundraise at the same time. So we totally get that. And then, other uncomfortable goal is, we're launching this, reinsurance entity as part of our captive. So we're starting with one of our, portfolio companies is the first sell in it. But I think uncomfortable goal is I want to get us up to, 5 companies that we're backing, providing reinsurance for in our captive. And, I'm absolutely positive we could do 3. 5 is definitely the stretch goal. So yeah, definitely happy to check back next year and see if I hit those.
You know what? I would never bet against you, and you are driven and you're laser focused all the time. So I'm looking forward to catching up with you at ITC, and definitely going to be in New York. I'm going to bring my media crew, and we want to cover your New York event and bring more exposure to it.
Let's do it, Jeff.
So,
yeah, you can have a whole room to do live podcasts.
Dave, I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.